Good evening. Let's begin.
Good evening, Ana Luisa.
Good evening, Ambassador. Thank you so much for being here.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. Yuko.
Hi, good evening. How are you?
Good evening, Mr. Johanna. Okay, I believe we're live. So let's kick off. My name is Ana Luisa. I am the Director of Public Relations in this edition of the America's Model United Nations. And it's a great honor for me to be here today to kick off our activities with this very special panel. Over the past few months, we have been thinking about how we can change and modify our events to this new format due to the pandemic. AMUN has always been very special. We have students from all over Brazil together in one day, and we wish to keep this spirit alive even in these circumstances. So thank you all for participating today. How the panel will work. We will select our questions that will be sent from the chat. So everyone whose participation can send the questions, and then later on after the presentations, we will ask each ambassador a question. So we are pleased to welcome here today the 4 Nordic ambassadors from the embassies in Brasilia to our exhibition panel, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Norway, for a presentation on the defense of Denmark also, the defense of the human rights and ethical policies in minorities in their countries. So to kick off our panel, I invite please the Swedish ambassador Johanna Skoog to start her talk regarding gender equality. Mr. Johanna is a career diplomat and has been based in Brasilia since September 2019. She has worked at the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs since 1987. Her career at the ministry is mainly centered in the fields of multilateral affairs, development, and human rights. In this regard, Mrs. Wismar has worked twice at the United Nations, most recently as a senior advisor on the Office of Special Representative of the General Secretariat for Children in Armed Conflict. She was also a board member of Plan International Sweden for 8 years, and organization focused on children's and developing rights. She holds an MBA from Lund University in Sweden. Mr. Johanna, you have the floor for 10 minutes. I will raise my hand when we left 2 minutes left, so just to inform you of the time, please. I'm sorry, Mr. Johanna, you turned off your camera. I'm not sure.
I turned off my camera.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was going to turn on my video or my mic, and then I turned off my camera. So sorry for that. Okay, I'll start over again. Okay. So welcome to all of you. I'm very happy to be here and to learn that so many Brazilian students are watching and participate in the AMUN initiative. And I would like to commend you for doing this, because I believe that irrespectively of what you want to do in the future, be it in diplomacy, international organizations, or in private business, a deep knowledge of the world around us is crucial, because globalization is here to stay, and all societies and countries are interconnected in trade, in science, and development, and collaborating across borders between individuals and countries, regions, and the private sector. I think that's the only way to reach the SDGs and the Paris Agreement and ensure that we have a sustainable future. And I'm also very happy to share the stage with my Nordic colleagues. Our countries are very similar. We have similar languages, culture, and values, similar levels of social, economic, and environmental development. And we are quite innovative in thinking. Tonight, I will speak about gender equality, but it could have been any of my colleagues who said more or less the same things. So you may know that the Nordic countries are pioneers in women's rights, or rather gender equality. And some even say that this stems from the Viking ages, when the women were left to take care of the farms while the men were out pillaging and sailing around the world. In Sweden, we started early. In 1845, we introduced equal inheritance rights for men and women. And in 1971, women and men were started to be taxed separately, which was an important incentive for families to let the women work too. In 1974, Sweden became the first country in the world to introduce parental leave, meaning that any of the parents can take leave to be with a child. Prior to that, it was a mother only, and she had 180 days. So parents are now entitled to share 480 days, almost 16 months of paid parental leave. And when a child is born or adopted, and nearly 80% of the salary will be received for the first 390 days. 3 months of these are allocated specifically to one of the parents and cannot be transferred. And today, around 1/3 of these days are used by men. And interestingly enough, this number is even higher among men with a higher education and with a higher salary. So it's an interesting fact, I think. And since 1995, municipalities must provide affordable, subsidized childcare of good quality to all children over the age of 1. And gender equality became also a separate policy area in the 70s. So many of the improvements in society since then depend not only on government and public policy, but also very strong civil society, women's movement, and private sector. We usually say that we have a feminist government, because the majority of our ministers are women, 12 out of 22, and we have a gender equality minister. Of course, the overarching goal is to have a national gender equality, and that's to shape, to give women the same power to shape the society and their own lives. And there are 6 subsets: influence, economy, health, education, work, and bodily integrity. But some lessons learned from these years working with gender equality. True gender equality can only be achieved when we're enabling men and women to have both career and family. And this is by introducing concrete and targeted instruments, such as parental leave and childcare, sexual and reproductive health and rights, non-discrimination, and proactive gender plans. In the workplace and free education, including through the university level. I think the other next lesson is that we must view what are the impediments for true gender, but also gender budgeting, which means that we see actively how much money is allocated and how are women and girls affected by the budget. And one example of this is the Swedish Research Council, which is the largest body promoting government funds for research. And they have actually reached a gender equality in the allocation of research grants. And then the third main lesson is that gender equality is not only about women and their rights, it's also in the interest of men and of society as a whole. Because women's equal participation enrich society by contributing to the economic development, to science, to innovation, to the GDP, and by broadening the government's tax base. And of course, men benefit from being active parents, and decision-making, as we know, in mixed boards is much better than in single-sex boards in companies, etc. Sweden has been very active in UN discussions on women's rights. We have the Beijing Conference, the Commission on Status of Women, Security Council Resolution 1325, and other specialized fora, but not in our bilateral foreign relations. But recognizing this in 2014, that we needed consistency in bilateral field too, Sweden became the first government to adopt a feminist foreign policy. Since then, Canada, France, Mexico, Luxembourg, and Spain have also declared a government's commitment, and many more countries have introduced focus on women's rights. The term feminist met with a lot of skepticism in the beginning when it was first introduced, but it's quite simple. It implies taking women's rights, representation, and resources into account by formulating policies and allocating resources. And that could be simple activities such as putting together a gender mixed delegation or ensuring that women's participation in conflict resolution and peace building. Last year, we decided to go one step further. We started looking at women in trade, gender equality in trade. And one of my minister's favorite example is, why should women's blouses have higher import duties than men's shirts, for example? And why do we have so few women participating in trade delegations when we have so many great women leading companies? Sweden sounds like it's perfect, but it's not. We still have a lot of actions to go through. Women are still paid less than men in general. And we could actually say that we work for free for a little bit more than an hour every day compared to men, if you look at our salaries. This is mainly because the job choices that we make, women are still overrepresented in the public sector, in childcare and healthcare, etc., where salaries are lower than in the private sector in technical jobs. So one goal is to encourage women to diversify a little bit more their job choices. There are still too few women in top positions in the private sector. Only 13% of CEOs and only 19% of company boards have women. And we do not have quota in Sweden, but this is something that's often discussed. And when we come to household work and parental leave, women are still taking the majority of the days and still performing most of the unpaid work at home. But among the gains, I'm happy to say that in the foreign ministry now, we're 48% female ambassadors, and we're about the same number of female managers at different manager levels in ministry in Stockholm. And around 45% of elected representatives at all levels are women, parliament, regional, municipal levels. In academia, female students are the majority. Half of the doctoral degree students and lecturers are women, and almost 30% of full professors. And lastly, in a younger generation, born in the late 80s and early 90s, fathers are taking parental leave, and that's the norm now, as well as equally sharing the chores of the household. But still some work to do. So we like to work with many other countries around the world to realize women's equal rights. And I know that among the Brazilian students facing us here or seeing us here, there are lots and lots of great women. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johanna. It was very interesting to understand how there's still so much work to do, but also considering everything that has been done. And now I'd like to present His Excellency, the Ambassador of Denmark in Brazil, Mr. Nikolai Fritz. He has been the Danish ambassador to Brazil since September 2018. With a master's in law and MBA in foreign trade and business, Nikolai started his career at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1998 as section head in the European Union Policy Coordination Department. He was deputy head of mission at the embassy in Buenos Aires and the embassy of Brasilia, as well as consul general at the consulate in São Paulo. Nikolai has a deep knowledge of politics and economics in Latin America. Prior to his current position here in Brazil, he was consul general at the consulate in Shanghai. Before the ambassador starts, we would like to present a short video regarding gender equality in Scandinavia.
Affordable and quality childcare is a top priority across the Nordic countries. Preschools not only allow for all parents to be breadwinners, they are also an important early learning environment. Almost all 3 to 5-year-olds are in childcare, and the high demand sometimes calls for creative solutions. Nordic parents spend, on average, 10% of their net income on childcare, since the fees are highly subsidised. What's the impact? As many as 76% of women in the Nordics are in the labour market.
Mr. Nikolai, you have the floor for 10 minutes. As the same, I will raise my hand just to inform you there are 2 minutes left.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay, very good. So, well, we're very delighted also to take part of this, I believe it's the 23rd AMUN conference. And I'm very happy to see a generation of students interested in diplomacy and international cooperation. I think global events of the past year have shown us that no country is alone and will be able to answer all the ecological, social, and economic questions that challenge us today. That is why I believe that sustainable solutions are best pursued in settings that encourage a deepened cooperation, just like this one. Therefore, I hope that the dialogue will be your main tool in this conference so that everyone can inspire and encourage each other in pursuit of the best possible solutions. When we talk about inspiration, we tend to think about only sharing successes and our best ideas. Indeed, it is a great satisfaction when they come to the Nordic countries are remembered as positive examples of other countries, particularly in the social equality. Our commitment to the value of freedom, respect, equality, and tolerance often place us atop of the international rankings. However, our good, let's say almost perfect perception is not always entirely consistent with reality. That is why I think it's important to share not only the good stories, but also our challenges and shortcomings, as well as our ideas as to how to deal with them. For example, many would probably think that we have achieved in Denmark full gender equality. However, the statistics indicate that although we have achieved formal equality in the sense that nobody's being discriminated against the law, there is still a way to go before women and women, boys and girls have de facto equal opportunities. In fact, we're lagging behind our Nordic counterparts in some respects, such as equal pay, a number of women in politics, as well as management and private company boards. Historically, the rights of LGBT people in Denmark have been constantly developed and improved. In 1989, Denmark became the first country in the world to allow same-sex registered partnership. And in recent years, same-sex couples secured the right to marry and start family. These rights have brought with them greater social and cultural acceptance of LGBT people in the Danish society. Today, people's freedom to choose their partner and to be open about their sexual orientation and gender identity are fundamental rights of the Danish society. However, data and studies indicate that LGBTI people are still at greater risk of marginalization and poor well-being than the rest of the Danish population. This shows that in spite of being a global frontrunner when it comes to LGBTI rights, we cannot relax. The important thing is that we recognize these shortcomings. Yes, we have been working to promote equal rights and opportunities for several years, but we still need to continue these efforts. The Danish government's vision is that everyone should have equal opportunities to participate in society and realize their potential and talent. Everyone has a part to play, and no one should experience discrimination based on gender, sexual orientation, gender identity. To fulfill this, the government proposed ambitious goals and concrete action plans with several cross-cutting initiatives to promote structural and cultural changes in Denmark and worldwide. We must constantly be aware of what researchers call unconscious bias, the preconceived and often unconscious ideas and expectations that we all have about gender roles. These ideas can manifest themselves in our families, in the education system, in the professional life, and in society as a whole. One of the objectives of the government action plan is to try to neutralize the effect of this bias and guarantee the promotion of diversity. For instance, in education, this means promoting greater gender balance in vocational training, education and training, increasing the presence of women in STEM courses. A gender stereotype choice of education has future impact on the labor market, limiting individual young persons' choices and contributing to the emergence of bottlenecks in the labor market, which is limiting factor for companies having more women in leadership positions. Promoting equality in education also means expanding measures to strengthen comprehensive sexuality education in schools and providing our children and young people with a satisfactory level of knowledge about their own health and well-being, as well as about the interaction between gender, body, and sexuality. In relation to the labor market, government efforts include dialogue with the private sector and introducing target figures of policies for the gender composition for executive boards. We seek to ensure that women and men are remunerated equally for the same function, skills, experience, and performance. In the public sector, salary setting must be based on facts and transparency. It cannot solely be how good an employee is of being visible and assertive in their demands or negotiating. Another point of focus is to ensure that fathers take more active role in their children's upbringing. This includes bringing about changes in how both employers and public authorities perceive and act in relation to fathers and mothers. For example, in many cases, authorities send digital mail about a common child solely to the mother, and some fathers are not involved on equal footing when healthcare professionals advise on parenting. In addition, we need to encourage fathers to take personal leave or parental leave. This matters when it comes to the division of labor in families and benefits the mother's career, leading to increase in the family's overall income. These efforts represent neither the first step nor the finish line. As you can see, Denmark also has a lot of work to do. We want to ensure that we consistently walk the talk when it comes to freedom, respect, equality, and tolerance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nikolai. Again, very interesting to mention all these initiatives to us, a very valuable contribution. Now, I want to shift a little bit change the subject a little bit. I'm honored to invite His Excellency, the Ambassador of Finland in Brazil, Mr. Jouko Leinonen, to make his speech regarding traditional people's rights in Finland. Again, a very important subject in human rights. Ambassador Leinonen joined the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs as a career diplomat in 1996 and has held various posts before being appointed as ambassador to Brazil in September 2018. Before joining the MFA, Ambassador Leinonen worked as a consultant at Accenture. He holds Finnish master's degrees in engineering and political science, as well as French bachelor degrees in economics and history. Please, Mr. Jouko, you also have the floor for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Anna-Luisa. And good evening to everybody. A real pleasure to be here with all my Nordic colleagues and to speak about Sami people. Indigenous people is really an interesting topic to talk about between Brazil and Nordic countries, because, well, we, the Nordics, are by no means the ones who are the exemplary in this subject. I fully admit that there are dark pages in this story, like I think in all the stories which treat the relation of national states with indigenous people. And of course, our history with Sami is as long as the history of Finland and Sweden and Norway, because we have been living as neighbors the whole written historic time and even before. Maybe I have to tell you a detail of myself also, that I'm actually from the northern province of Finland called Lapland. Actually, Lapland is divided by three countries: Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and that's where the Samis and, of course, the Father Christmas also live. And thus, I have seen quite near how Finnish government and all the other Nordic governments have changed their attitudes towards Sami people during the last, let's say, 50 years and during the last decades. And I have to admit that, yes, relation has become much better compared to those times when some people were not really fully recognized their cultural and linguistic autonomy, which started, at least in the case of Finland, quite late, only in the 1960s, I would say, in the real terms. Let me tell first some general facts that, well, the Samis are the only indigenous people of the European Union. The fact we are proud about, and there are about 10,000 Samis in Finland, more than double in Norway and Sweden. And their integration with main population has been so intensive that nowadays more than 60% of Samis in Finland live outside the Sami homeland. The biggest Sami village being nowadays our capital, Helsinki, actually. This, of course, brings some challenges, bringing education services and communications in the Sami languages, which, of course, nowadays are in a very special care. We don't want to lose any of them anymore. The traditional Sami livelihoods are fishing, gathering, handicrafts, hunting, and reindeer herding, and, of course, the modern ways of practicing them nowadays. And of course, this reindeer herding still functions as a very important cornerstone of the Sami culture, and offers about meat and food, also material for clothing, handicrafts, etc. It's a very rich culture. About the languages of the Samis, it's interesting that this, although it's a small nation, only there are very many languages. These different Sami languages are spoken in different areas of this Sapmi, the Sami homeland, which is divided by Finland, Norway, Sweden, and a little bit by Russia. And those speakers in geographically very distant areas cannot always understand each other's language. And yes, there are fewer than 10 Sami languages which are still spoken. They were much more, let's say, a couple of hundreds of years ago. And in Finland, we have 3 of them: Northern Sami, Skolt-Sami, and Inari-Sami. And this Northern Sami in Finland has more than 2,500 speakers, while in up north there in Norwegian side, there are, I think, 25,000 speakers, so much more in Norway and Sweden. While these 2 other languages, Skolt and Inari-Sami, they have only a few hundred speakers each, and it has been really a struggle to revive these 2 smaller ones lately. For example, the Inari-Sami language had just a handful of native speakers when some people started to revive it, and they founded association, and they're called language nests, which are kind of daycare centers where these remaining grannies started to pass the language to next generation. It's really a passionate story if you start to look at it. There were, of course, volunteers also who knew that they were descendants of this Inari-Sami group, and they wanted to get back their old language, which is also an empowering thing for indigenous people. And then, well, some challenges in the Finnish side. Unlike the Scandinavian languages, Finnish language, the national language, is linguistically related to Sami languages, unlike Swedish and Norwegian. Finnish and Sami languages, they are all part of Finno-Ugrian family of languages. And this has made the relation of Finns and Sami somewhat nearer, maybe compared to with Swedes and Norwegians. This closeness has made many Samis to assimilate themselves totally as Finns, and thus we have lost many Sami speakers and cultural traditions. And the nearness of this Finnish culture and Sami cultures during the centuries has created also a special challenge in Finnish Lapland, the province where Sami people live. The Finns in Lapland have been herding also reindeers, this traditional livelihood of Samis, and almost as long as Sami people. And this is why the Finnish government hasn't been able to give monopoly of reindeer herding, for example, to Sami people, which is giving some friction. And this is also one reason behind the difficulties that Finland hasn't been able to ratify some indigenous people's protocols in the United Nations, because some Finns who many times are claimed to be Sami origin, but have lost their languages in the course of the centuries, but still in Lapland, they would suffer this kind of decisions. I think Brazil have this kind of challenges too. And well, I think I will leave something here, but okay, to make long story short, I would say that integrating Sami people to the Finnish society has not been easy, and many questions still remain to be solved. And well, we have been doing quite a lot, let's say, since 1960s. For example, Finland was the first country among the Nordics to have a Sami parliament. First, it was called a delegation. It was founded already in 1973. And this Sami parliament is, of course, nowadays a very important self-government body for the Samis, and it kind of plans and implements this self-government guaranteed to the Sami people. And yes, they can also they take care of the international connections. They are many times in the United Nations. This parliament can make initiatives to the Finnish authorities, and there are 21 members, and of course elected democratically and every 4 years, and the parliament is funded by the Finnish government. To conclude, maybe I would say and summarize that during the last century, Finnish government has gone a long way from ignoring the specificity of the Sami culture to promoting and protecting it. And nowadays, Samis have a constitutional right for their languages and culture, but only since 2000, more than 10 years later than, for example, Brazilian constitution gave rights to the indigenous peoples. And well, nowadays there are very many schools and newspapers, TV stations, radios to promote Sami culture, both in Sami region and in Helsinki, like I told, where many of these Sami people live. And for example, I have one story about the Finnish national TV broadcaster Yle has a special Sami language department, which provides content in all these 3 Sami languages, although some of them are very small. They have children television series, TV news broadcasts, and online news, and even a Netflix-style service called Sami Films streams movies in Sami languages with English subtitles. It's really interesting. And as an example of the revival of this Sami cultures nowadays, UK broadcaster BBC, for example, named Yle journalist Sara Weslin, herself a Sami, one of the world's most inspiring and influential women in 2019. I think my time is running out, but I still, if you allow, Anna-Luisa, I will tell one thing, that there in the northern part of Lapland, there is the Inari, which is like the center of the Sami culture. They have very interesting things to know. There are culture center, there is this parliament, there are museums, and myself, I think I am planning this coming European summer to visit those centers, and I welcome all you after COVID permits to come and see a different kind of Europe there in Lapland, divided by 3 Nordic countries, Finland, Norway, and Sweden.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yoko. Right on time. It was very interesting to learn about this problem that concerns both Finland and Brazil. And now I'm honored to invite His Excellency Ms. Niels Martin Brunen, Ambassador of Norway in Brazil, to an exhibition also on traditional people's rights. Mr. Niels Martin joined the Norwegian Foreign Service in 1994. He has held various positions in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs related to international trade policies, strategic communication and public diplomacy, administration, crisis, and management. He has served the Norwegian embassies in Morocco and the United Kingdom. From 2010 to 2014, he was posted as Deputy Head of Mission at the Norwegian Embassy in Beijing. His last position was Deputy Director General in the service of the Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Oslo. He is currently the Ambassador to Norway in Brazil. And Mr. Gurney holds a Master of Political Science degree on the University of Oslo. Mr. Niels, thank you so much. You have the floor for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Anna. So, Yoko has talked about the main aspects, I think, of the Sami people in the Nordic countries. The Sami is, as Yoko said, inhabits large part of northern Norway, Sweden, Finland, and a little bit of Russia. Half of them live in Norway. Our commitment, Norway's commitment for indigenous people's rights, are very closely related to our own experiences with the Sami people and our own mistakes, our own brutality in how we dealt with the Sami people 150 years ago. Learning from that lesson and promise that we are trying to help both Sami people to restore their culture and also help to promote indigenous people's rights in other parts of the world. So we've come a long way, and it's very interesting that there's a lot of things that happen in the Nordic countries around between 1980 and 1990, 1995, where it seems that we in many ways started to ask ourselves, what is progress? How does progress work? And when it comes to indigenous peoples in Norway, this was illustrated by the building of a huge hydroelectric dam. That might ring a bell in Brazil. I think that you have some of the exactly the same issues here, where this hydroelectric dam up north in Norway, in a place called Alta, would flood loads of traditional communities for Sami people and destroy a lot of valuable land for their reindeer herds, for traditional gathering of food, etc. And in that process, I think that Norwegian society started to ask itself, what is progress really? Is it about having more energy and doing that in spite of what we damage? Or is progress about listening to those people that actually are affected by this and trying to integrate those opinions in our society? So there was a shift in relation to this very dam, with a lot of protests, with civil disobedience, hunger strikes. It was a serious thing in Norway. But at the end of that, something shifted, and shifted properly. So that process and a lot of history before made Norway realize that we have to respect the culture and the history of a major culture part of our society. So we looked to Finland to emulate the parliament. So we now have a parliament that is fairly similar to the Finnish one. It was established in Norway in 1989. The Swedes came a little bit later in 1993, but the Finland were early, right, Yoko? In 1973, I think the Finns had established the parliament. But this became a formal public authority, with democratically elected parliamentarians whose mission is to work for the Sami people and culture. And they do enjoy a certain degree of autonomy. And since 1986 in Norway, there is an official Sami anthem. There is an official Sami flag. And this is not seen as a threat to Norwegian national security, sovereignty. It is just an expression of a culture, and pride of having that culture, and finally being able in Norwegian society to show that and be proud of it. The Sami of today struggle with the consequences of loss of language, loss of culture. As Yoko mentioned, there were many more cultures and many more languages that are lost, and we won't get them back. But now we are doing our very best to save what's left and to rebuild. So building also Sami cultural institutions is vital. So as is the protection of Sami intellectual property rights, and the ongoing issue, just like Yoko said, about the right of use of their traditional land for Sami people in relation to other Norwegian citizens. And this is an ongoing issue, not easy. Norway is an oil-producing country. We know that there's a lot of resources in this area, so that's an ongoing thing. Another challenge is also avoiding stereotypes. We think of Sami people as traditional people, but as Yoko also said, Oslo is probably also the biggest Sami village in Norway. My colleague in Singapore is Sami, the Norwegian ambassador to Singapore. So we have to think about what Sami culture is in a modern world. We have to think about what progress actually is. And we also have to think about how modern technology makes it possible to live and use modern tools to do traditional activities, economic activities, in a very efficient way. When I was posted in Beijing, and when I was there, I had a Sami delegation visiting because they were going to Mongolia to teach rain herders in Mongolia how to use satellite information and tracking as tools to take care of their herds and to be much more efficient in how they do large-scale herding. So Sami people are highly sophisticated in technology and also deeply rooted in their traditional way of life. One final thing, the most important convention when it comes to indigenous people is the ILO 169 convention. A lot of the work that we do internationally is to promote this convention and also make sure that the countries that have signed it actually live up to it. So this was ratified by Norway in 1990 as the first country to do so. And it's now a convention that really is the backbone of indigenous people's rights. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Niels. We will begin the questions now. And the first one will be for Mr. Niels, yourself. Regarding your presentation, sorry, just 1 second. Oh, I messed up. It's for Mr. Johanna. Are you there, Mr. Johanna?
Yes, I'm here. Hi. Yeah, of course. Now I turned off my camera and my mic just to have better connection. Okay. Yes.
This question was made from Natasha. She's from Brasilia. And the question, I will read it and then you have 3 minutes to answer, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So Natasha is asking that representation systems often fail to be democratic enough due to the fact that first representations forget intersectionalities within groups, so the voice of one may not be able to represent the voice of all. Another very common fact observed is the loss of connection between representatives and voters. What are the main aspects that make this political representation legitimate, inclusive, and accountable?
That's a very scientific question, and I'll do my best to answer that one. But of course, democracy is not perfect because you will always have representatives representing people. But I think that's why one token woman or one token LGBT person in a board and a government, etc., is not enough. You need diversity. You need more diversity. You need more women, more of other groups too. More indigenous, more born in foreign countries with migratory background, for example, in the Nordic countries, to really bring out the problems. So the more discussions you have, the more views you have, and the better you will be represent. And I think also one thing that we actually have in our system, we vote according to lists. The parties present lists of candidates where they've internally ranked them from 1 and down to, I think, 20, 30, depending on. But we've introduced a system where you can actually, as a voter, mark your preference on the voting ballot. So if you don't want the 10 first ones, but you actually really want the 11th one, you can make a cross, and then that person will receive that extra vote. And that's some of them are very good and have actually passed through the whole system getting up there. So it's been quite, I think that helps it. It's not perfect, but at least that gives a little bit of voter connection, at least. But it's a challenge always, no? It's a challenge. Thanks.
Mr. Niels?
Yes, if I may, just a comment, because it's a good question. And as Johanna says, democracy is kind of the least horrible system we have so far, right? It's not perfect by any means. One thing I think that the Nordic countries does quite well is how we relate to civil society. And that has to do with this, exactly what Natasha is saying, that we accept and we acknowledge that all representation systems have a deficit. So in order to deal with that, all the Nordic countries have very strong relations between government, parliament, and civil society organizations. And it's hurtful at times. You get criticized. You have to deal with people that really doesn't agree with you. But it helps the voices that aren't being represented through the formal representation systems.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johanna and Mr. Niels, for the contributions. Let's move on to the next question.
I couldn't find the hand, so I couldn't raise it. But if I may, very quickly, just to a little bit commenting on what Johanna and Niels said. I think it's not only. I mean, it's not only the parliament when it legislates that consults. I think it's in the day-to-day running of the government also. I used to work a lot with trade politics, for example. I know this is not what we're discussing today, but I think I'm just taking it as a means of an example. We would never adopt a trade policy without hearing different areas of society, the business sector, but also sectors working, civil society working with human rights, labor rights, etc. So I think it's really, really inherent in our system, not just at the parliamentary level, but all through government, that we have this, let's say it's some sort of consensus culture. Not that everybody needs to agree, but at least we consult different parts of society before we legislate and conduct our policies. Thank you.
Can I just add here that I think that this is what Nikolai and has said now is super important, because it's also about respecting the minorities in your decision making within. It's listening to them and taking them in and respecting their voices when the decisions are taken. So that, because next time it might be a different government, and we can't keep changing policies and politics all the time. We need to have a long-term view on what can be done, and that I think our countries are quite good at looking a little bit further into the future than the next election. You look critical, Nikolai.
No, I completely agree. I think you mentioned that it's about taking everybody on board, and I think that's really important. But it's also about making legislation sustainable. Yeah. I think this is really important. Let me just take another example, and I'm sorry, there's only one I can think of, because I've been working so well with it, the past year or so. It's the Danish climate legislation, for example, where we have set up some extremely rigid targets. Now, how do we reach these targets? Government can decide just to legislate and say, this is how we're going to do it. This is what the transport sector has to do. This is what the agribusiness sector have to deliver. No, they ask the sector. So they had these 13 partnerships consisted of these different, and they come up with a solution or the ideas. Let's say the pharma sector, how can we save on emissions? Transport sector, how can we save on emissions? Agricultural sector, how can we save on emissions, right? So they submit their proposals to the government that will filter it and see if it's viable, but it ensures for one thing some ownership to the entire legislation and the process, but certainly also sustainability. It's going to be sustainable that way. Sorry, I was not skeptical. I just needed to say this. Thank you.
Mr. Yoko, you want to add?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to, I think it's related, before anybody asks the question, why the Nordic countries are quite advanced, although we have a lot to do also in the position in the equality questions. And I always have a standard answer for that I think that's something to do with our climate, and then our countries which are pretty vast and sparsely populated, we have never had this luxury of leaving nobody behind. So I think this is one reason why in Nordic countries the women have taken the position at much earlier than in many other countries. And when our democracies were developing at the end of the 1800s and at the beginning of 1900s, it was our countries where it was very natural that the women also asked, we have to vote too. In Finland, it happened already in 1906. And not just voting men, but women could also candidate, of course. I mean, why would women vote just the men? Huh? I mean, I think this is quite natural answer why we have been going first, and then kind of showing the example that in equality questions, actually, there is no field in the human life where we can't be equal. Huh? I think that's what in Nordic countries we have shown to Europe and many other countries.
Thank you all very much for this discussion. Following up is a question made by Pedro Santos from Curitiba to Mr. Nicolai. He is asking about how is the gender issue in the Danish service abroad? Do diplomats' husbands and wives receive any kind of incentive to care for their children abroad, or do they stay in Denmark with the children?
That is a very good question. I mean, this is going straight into the heart of our ministry and our gender policy. And to be honest, I would say until like 5 years ago, we were not doing a very good job. I'll be very honest about it. I think it has improved a lot because there's so much more focus now. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position where, like Johanna said, I think you said, Johanna, you almost have more female ambassadors than you have male, or at least it's 50-50 almost, right? We're not there yet. We will have it in the sense that we have a pipeline of female talents coming up. I mean, at deputy level, we have a lot of females. So eventually we're going to get there. But it's just, I mean, I think it's such, I mean, it really gets to the heart of the problem. I mean, one figure, I didn't put it into my introduction initially, because, but one, I had to limit myself because you didn't give me too much time. But one thing that I really thought was interesting is that I think Denmark, when it comes to getting women into higher education, we're doing a very, very good job. I think we're like first in the world, among the first in the world. And I would even have to admit the my female colleagues at university, they do better than the males also. I mean, there is no reason why they should not reach, let's say, management level, being in a private company or being in the public sector, an ambassador or something like that. But the fact is we lose them on the way somehow. They, as I said, they get into the system because when you look at Denmark and you see how many females we have as legislators, senior officials and managers, I think we rank, like 17th in the world or something like that. So there's something wrong here, right? I mean, we're number one when it's about getting them into the higher educational systems. They're doing very good. They're doing better than their male colleagues. But then when it comes to managerial positions and high positions in the public and the private sector, we lose them somehow. And I think, I mean, you could speculate, why is that? I mean, there is no, as I said in my introduction, there is no formal discrimination. There's nothing that sort of hinders them, I mean, for getting there. But I think one of the things that we have realized, and something we really, really need to work on, is that, I mean, the groundwork for a career, that is between your 25 and 35 years. Now, what do a lot of women do at that age? They have children. So just come back to the importance of also, not just maternity leave, but also paternity leave, and, thinking of this in an entirely different way. So I think this is where we're losing them. I mean, and sadly, a lot of them, when they come back from maternity, they don't necessarily step into the career track again. So it's a critical point. We're doing what we can to promote and encourage female colleagues within our foreign service to give it a go. A simple thing. I mean, when we apply for our postings, instead of it being 4 or 5 months before the posting is, you need to go to the posting. Now it's a year before, simply because we recognize that a lot of female colleagues, they need more time to prepare the family, to prepare the kids for positioning abroad. it's a small thing, but we have to think about, you know, what are the details we can work with in order to promote females in our system. So I hope it more or less answered it, but I know that some of my Nordic colleagues, they must have similar experiences also of user point, even though I think you're doing a lot better than we are when it comes to the Foreign Service, at least. So, sorry.
Ms. Johanna, please.
Thank you. No, I mean, we were actually looking into this when I was ambassador in Indonesia, together with my female colleagues in the region, because we received a question from the ministry: how can we have more women as ambassadors around the world? And when we started looking at our terms and conditions, and also, you know, what is happening in real life, and one of the conclusions is that it is much harder to get a husband to move with you than to get a wife to move with you. Partly it has to do with childbearing, but it also has to do with maybe men are more attached to their careers. Maybe more of my male colleagues marry foreign women that have taken on themselves to move around from the beginning because they marry a diplomat. When we meet, you know, when we marry someone with not necessarily a diplomat, that we marry, maybe someone that studies economics or something, but not someone that you know is going to go around the world. But it's also difficulties in being then a single parent de facto abroad, because you have to do both representation, entertainment, traveling, and everything else, and the childcare, the school care, the everything, if your husband is not there, or you have to give up and move out on your own without your family. And that's also a big price to pay. Another career diplomat, we didn't know that anyway, or when we met. We had 3 kids, and I've taken leave of absence a couple of times to make family life or work situation work out. Luckily, I've caught up, but now we're living in separate cities. He's in New York, because otherwise one of us would have to take leave again and sacrifice even more of the career, even though kids are grown up. So it's hard choices, and I think we still need to work on role models and on prejudice and the whole system around that. So there's a way to go still, but it's worth it. Both of it, both the family and the career, I have to say.
Mr. Jurko?
Thank you. Just to add, I mean, I can sign all what has been said by Johanna and Nikolai. It is really more difficult for women, I think, to have this career. But well, I can tell that in the case of Finland, we already have had this for some time. Half or even more than half of the ambassadors have been ladies, and they are getting the best postings nowadays, so-called most thought. The EU ambassador is a lady. The neighboring countries are important, like our embassy in Stockholm has been lady for a long time. And talking seriously, getting new diplomats. We used to have for decades, like even I mean half boys and girls getting into the diplomatic service, and there was no quotas. It was natural selection, I would say, and that's what people working there earlier have swear that there was nothing. They didn't choose half. But nowadays we have a challenge that there are about 2/3 are young ladies, because they are simply, like Nikolai was telling, they're getting much better diplomas. I don't know, but the ladies, the young women, they are more international. They have more courage to spend the year in Brazil or in China, but the young men are not doing that much. So we have a challenge nowadays to get more qualified young men to enter our diplomatic service.
Mr. News, for final contribution.
Yeah, it's the same thing in Norway. I think that there's also a lag. You know, you have a generation or two that's being recruited, And that's what Yoko talks about, that as we go along, you see that the women are coming strongly. And that, I think, in itself also changes a little bit how the ministry will have to relate to this. So those that went first, perhaps the generation before Johanna, and our generation have to struggle with issues that will be solved because there will be a majority of women in the service, and they need other setups in order to make this work. One thing that I've seen in the Norwegian service is that there are many couples like Johanna and her husband, two career diplomats that find together. And that's, I also see a trend in my ministry that men also take years off. I have a colleague now that he went with his wife to Athens as a spouse. He spent 3 years there. Now he's back, and he's now Director General at the Prime Minister's office in Oslo. So it's absolutely possible to have a break for men as well. So thank you.
Thank you all very much for this incredible contributions, not only now, but throughout our panel. Unfortunately, we have to end here today. The other questions, I encourage everyone to look for the embassy social media and might connect through there to discuss even more on your questions. And well, I'd just like to thank everyone who has been participating, either here on our Zoom meeting or at our YouTube transmission. And Mr. Yuko, Mr. Niels, Mr. Johanna, and Mr. Nikolai, it's been a great honor for me to be our host today. And I would also like to invite everyone to the official opening ceremony that will be happening right now in under 10 minutes. And let's kick off our activities for the weekend. I'm very excited to have everyone here together, but not physically together, but together either way, to discuss these topics that are very relevant for our society today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna-Luisa, and good luck to all of you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great participating.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Yeah, good luck.